Okay, good job. Hi, everybody. Welcome to... Oh, are you done?
It's working. I was like, wait a minute, what if it's not recording? You guys, we've done this 3 times.
Okay, really, let's just say this, that we've already recorded this next week and next week's videos like a month ago. And then we found out we did it without audio.
That's so
And we thought only 3 of you were lip readers. So, here we are, back again.
It's going to be better.
It's working.
It's going to be better this time.
So it's good. Okay. This is Don't Miss This. I'm David Butler.
I'm Emily Freeman.
And this week we are doing this is the end of the gospel. So let's step aside for just a second so you can see any spots that you want to pause and fill in there. Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20 to 21. And this is the end of the 4 gospels. So kind of like the halfway point through the year of studying the New Testament and where the story really is going to shift. Like this is the end of... Spoiler alert, Jesus leaves at the end of these chapters. And the story continues. So this is kind of a tipping point with the study.
And there are so many good things today. You're going to want your pen and your paper because there are that many good things at the end of these 4 Gospels.
Yeah, and we're going to go a little hyperspeed so we can try and get as many as we can. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is the story of the 4 Gospels and the story of Acts and moving into the second half of the New Testament is a testimony of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. What did President Hinckley say? There would be no Christmas if there wasn't an Easter. The story is about a resurrection story. That's the evidence that he is the Son of God, that he's the Redeemer, that he's the Savior. So we have this neat line at the top of the study guide sheet that says, the best evidence that Jesus is the Redeemer is the resurrection. The Christmas story is cute. The miracle stories were wonderful and tender. But that's the divinity in the story. Mm-hmm. He's not just a street preacher. He's not just a man of morals. He is Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. The best evidence of that is the resurrection. And the best evidence of the resurrection are witnesses. And that's what we have in the gospel. Like we got eyewitnesses. We've got like people who have written their testimonies or passed them on. Said, we saw the risen Lord. He was dead in the tomb, and God has brought him back to life.
And you remember how at the very beginning when we started this journey in January, we talked about as we started each of these Gospels that you could cross out the Gospel according to St. John and write in there the testimony according to St. John or the witness according to St. John. Those 4 Gospels become their witness of Jesus Christ, his birth, his healings, his ministry, and most importantly, his death and his resurrection and how it applied to them and to all the people that they loved. And then that becomes true of each of us also. We have the opportunity to become witnesses of that resurrected Lord and what that means for us and the people that we love as well.
Right. So as we were looking at the people that Jesus appeared to, the first witnesses of his resurrection, we kind of saw another pattern, one that we've kind of brought up a couple of times throughout the semester, or the...
Are you teaching institute right now?
Through this time period since January that we've been together. And the list of them is here's just a couple of them. But just think about, like, if we were to categorize some of these people... First person he appears to, that John says he appears to is Mary. And Mary happens to be a person who's got like a questionable reputation in past.
Plus she's a woman, and in those days, the witness of a woman would not have mattered. It wouldn't have even been taken seriously. So besides her unquestionable past, the fact that she is a woman makes it remarkable that Jesus is like, let's see, I think I'll start here first.
Right, and appearing to her. And the fact that, remember, we saw a couple weeks ago that she was a demonic woman, that she used to, so she, like, this is like, it's remarkable that he appears to her. The next one we have on the list is Simon Peter, who the very last time we see him before he sees the risen Lord he is at the campfire with a teenage girl denying that he has any reputation or knows anything about Jesus. So you've got that, and then you've got the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24. And you remember, they bunked with Jesus for 3 years, and then they walk down the road and talk with him, have dinner with him, come follow me lesson with him, and they don't even recognize him.
You love that they have no idea who he even is.
Right.
And the last one, Thomas, who you remember, we've entitled him Doubting Thomas, even though we like to call him the white-robed apostle of hope. But you think of those four people: a doubter, people who don't recognize him, people who have actually denied him, people with a questionable past. Don't you love thinking to yourself that could be any of us? That's who he chooses to appear to, are the people in the margins, the people who are unlikely, the people who seem the most humble or the most neglected or the most rejected. And that's where he comes. And personally, right?
Yeah.
One-on-one, he meets them where they are, which is what we have been teaching about him for the last 4 months, is that principle of Jesus that we love, that he's going to meet you where you are as you are. It's just what he does.
Right, and there's no room at the end of the Gospels for anybody reading them to think to themselves, yeah, but Jesus wouldn't appear to someone like me. That Jesus wouldn't get into my story. And that's absolutely not true. He shows that so clearly at the end, that he still lives and he is still appearing, and he's appearing to anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
So we just
So
love
good.
that part with the resurrection. We want to talk a little bit more about Peter, his story. If you go to John chapter 20 and 21, we're kind of going to wrap, just look at, he gets a little bit more extended
Are we
visit,
doing
I
that
guess
now?
you could
Or we're
say.
doing that
I think
after the
so.
final promises?
No, we'll do those at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
do Peter first. So go to John, I lied, 20. If you want to look at 20 for a second, that's a cute chapter, but go to 21.
Oh, and 21 is going to be one of your favorite chapters ever. We keep saying that, but it's true. You are going to love this chapter so much.
Okay, so this is what happens in John 21. Set the scene. After the resurrection, or after the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus, some people have seen him. We love this line that Peter says in verse 3, I go a-fishing. And I just love that line, number one, because I'm from Lehigh and Texas. I just love that. I feel like he's saying, like, I go a-fishing. And he's just going back
To what he knows.
Yeah, to like his
it's
old life.
It's so interesting. You think about it. He has had these 3 years. Remember, he left his nets. You remember that day. Jesus says, follow me. Remember those 2 words because they're going to become important. He's had that night of no fishing. Then all of a sudden Jesus is like, put your nets out. And he's like, really? I don't know if I want to do more fishing, but he does. And then you remember there's all of a sudden sinking boats and breaking nets, and he brings it all back. It's the best day of his professional career so far. And then Jesus is 2 words, follow me. And he does. And it's these 3 years that we've got all of the stories of Peter. There's Peter at Caesarea Philippi, who knows he is the Christ. You've got Peter walking on water. You have Peter in the daughter of Jairus' bedroom. You have all these things.
You have him
that
attacking
Peter
that whole army
witnessed.
of
Yeah.
people.
And cutting off
yeah.
Malchus's ear.
Right, and witnessing the healing of that, and just like...
Yes, all of a sudden he has done all this stuff, and then Jesus leaves, and then he's like, well, what should I do?
Yeah. And
I don't know.
And it was a great run.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, the
Yes.
3 years, he kind of must have about 6 months in thought, okay, we have
Yes.
sold out crowds every city we go.
Yes.
This is a big deal. The kingdom's coming. Then all of a sudden he dies and not much changes,
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like, so he's like,
What should I do?
Well-
and I know what I'm good at.
my nets are still in my shed.
Yeah, I'll go fishing.
Got extra bait.
And so he does, right? He's just going to go back fishing, and I think it's 9 of the 12 apostles were fishermen. So I think everyone probably was like, well, okay, back to regular life. And you love the Elder Holland talk where he kind of talks about that. He just sets it up so well, and he's going to go fishing, and they all go forth, and you love that they're just out there. Also, they don't have a very good night of fishing.
So they catch nothing, and it comes to the next morning, and Jesus is on the beach.
But no one knows it's Jesus. You
Yeah.
love that he tells us that.
Yeah.
No one knows it's Jesus.
So that's verse 4, and then he yells out, do you have any meat? Or in other words, do you have breakfast? Did you catch anything? And they're like, no, right? So then comes this stranger from the beach who yells out, and he says, well, why don't you try throwing your nets on the other side of the ship?
And don't you just wonder in that moment if Peter and John are like, wait a minute. Have we heard this before?
And because they do it without any argument, which is funny, because they're kind of like, and they throw it on the other side. As they pull them up in verse 6, they can't even pull up the nets anymore because they are so full of fish. fishes, for the multitude of fishes in verse 6.
Yep.
Right? And so right when they pull up the nets, and it's like almost like zzz, ding, 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 ding. And John, remember, who calls himself the one Jesus loves, turns to Peter and he's like, it's Jesus. And Peter...
You love this part so much. You love it because everyone else is like bringing the fish in, rowing back, and Peter is like, I can't wait. He just rips off everything and dives in the water, right?
It swims about 100 yards, it says, just going. He's like, the rest of y'all can row the boat in. I'm swimming.
My focus is on Jesus.
So he just swims all the way to the shore.
And let's just pause right now and just think, because one of the things we love the most about John chapter 21 is it almost takes all of Peter's life with Jesus and pulls it together in one chapter, because we're going to start out just like we did at the beginning, right? On a boat with a fisherman after a night of no fishing. And Jesus says, put out your nets. Okay, there's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is when Peter's in a boat and Jesus is away and Jesus says who he is, what's Peter's reaction? Get out of the boat. That's what Peter does. And he does it again right now. We watch him do it. And the third lesson we're going to see right now once he gets up onto the beach, and if you're not reading carefully, you don't even notice it. But in verse 9, if you look, it tells you.
It says that when they get there, there's already a fire started with coals, and Jesus is cooking breakfast for them. And he says, and there's fish laid thereon already. And it says, and bread. So they are going to share a meal with him, a miraculous meal of fish and bread.
Yeah, of loaves and fishes, right? All of a sudden now you're seeing all these 3 lessons are just going to come full circle again.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's interesting. I haven't thought this till right this second. That verse 11, where it talks about counting them, where it says, if you've never seen this before, verse 11 says he drew in the net, and it says, and 153 fish were in that net. And that's kind of funny, because it doesn't say like they caught a lot, or like about 100, or even about 150. Somebody went through and counted every single one of those miracle fish. And I like that it's there, because it's almost like, it's kind of like making you think, I wonder if Peter like starts looking back on his whole life and starts doing that himself. Like, let me count all the miracle things that have happened, ever since I've met Jesus.
Yeah, because he's almost having a flashback. And we love that thought. We put it on here about how many fish. And why did someone count them? We've talked a lot about it. Ann Voskamp, one of our favorite authors, talks about it on a blog post. What was the purpose of counting the fish? And there is just something powerful about counting the blessings of God in your life, like actually listing them and counting them and reflecting on them. We got a letter from Grace this week, our missionary, who I've read you some of her letters before, and we get the biggest kick out of her letters when they come, because you just don't know what is going to happen. And this week was no different.
The headings are the best.
Yeah, the headings are the best. Should I tell you the heading of this one? The one where I got a parking ticket.
They all start with the one where, which is awesome.
And you just don't know what's going to happen. And she does start out, please send cash. I'm trying to pay that off. So she starts. Meanwhile, she says, God is still better than I could ever imagine. And this week, when we parked the car illegally and got a bus pass, yes, again, I knew it was going to be a great one. And walking the streets of South Sac, I walked with Jesus. And when we sat on a curb with a woman and all her belongings in a cart who couldn't even talk but just kept pointing to the Bible. So for 5 minutes we just read, and for a second 3 minutes in, I wondered if maybe this was a waste of time. And God just told me, look around at who she is and her stuff and her heart. And God reminded me that this, at a bus stop in South Sac with someone with no home, is exactly where Jesus would be too. And I could feel him sitting right next to me. And then at a Home Depot parking lot, talking with a group of men just looking for work, who we got to tell about a God who has a plan, I could feel Jesus helping them feel hope. And then under an overpass that says, if you can dream it, you can do it, we met a man looking for a change, anything to make life better. And I told him how he could find it, the life he dreams about. And he told me I should be president. And I told him I only want the house. And after a few jokes with my new best friend, I gave him the start of his change. And walking away, I saw Jesus heal his eyes to see the change that was coming. And man, I will never be able to thank God enough for letting me get a parking ticket and bus passes and sit with the homeless people and talk to strangers and see sunsets and find lucky pennies and do it all right next to Jesus. God is good all the time. Don't you want to make a list like that?
And everybody wants to be on her email list now.
Oh, you totally do.
To grow in.
Yeah, it's so fun to read her, to read those letters. But I just think there is power in just taking, that was one day, right? There is power in just taking the time to count the fishes. So maybe today, after you're done talking about come follow me with your family, you will ask everybody to count the fishes.
Yeah, of the last day, of the last week, or whatever it is. That makes me think of, we wrote this on here, that John at the end of chapter 20, he says, and many other things. The 21's the one I like, huh?
Yes, I think it is the one you like.
John 20. Yeah. 25, John 21:25, where he ends and says, and there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which if they should be written, every one, I suppose, even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. And I love that Grace is writing those books, that we all have the chance to add to the books of the things that Jesus is still continuing to do. Like that is such a neat. I mean, you end the Gospels and you're like, don't end. Go to John 22. Give us Luke 25. I want Mark 17.
Yes.
And it's like they exist, but they're on the shelves and in the heart stories of people
and
everywhere.
In the journals and
right.
Yep, so good. Okay, so we got to go back. So they're going to have breakfast. They eat breakfast together. And then there's going to be a conversation between John and Jesus that is so good. I mean, Peter and Jesus that is so good. In verse 15, Jesus comes to Peter and says, Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? And he points to the fish, right? The 153 fish. And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love thee.
Which is so cool, because do you love me more than the fish, and do you love me more than the miracles? Like, are you just here because this has been a really fun show, and because I fed you, and you got to see cool things, or do you actually love me?
Yeah, that's so true. Anyways, I've never thought of it like that either.
That's cool.
That he's showing him the miracles or me and what comes next.
Right.
That's so good. And he says, yes, you know I do. And then Jesus says something that is so interesting. Before we even tell you, I just want you to think. Remember the first conversation that took place on the Sea of Galilee?
And we have a reference on the page for you of this one.
When he says to him, you're going to leave behind your nets and come and follow me. And he tells him, I will make you fishers of men, right? It's close. He's a fisherman. Now Jesus is going to make him a fisher of men. That's what's going to happen. Peter's like, okay, I think I'll try it. This time the conversation goes a little bit differently, because he says, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Okay. Then he tells him, feed my lambs. Do you think Peter's like, wait, I'm not a shepherd. I don't even know how to take care of lambs. I am a fisherman. And so Jesus says to him again, the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And he said unto him, yea, Lord, thou knowest I love thee. And then he says to him again, feed my sheep. And he says to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And now this time Peter is grieved because he's asked him 3 times. And I actually love the 3 times, because I love the thought of the 3 times he denied. And it's almost as if Christ is saying, here, you can't have a do-over of that night, but you can have a do-better now, right? I'm going to give you 3 chances
and actually,
to witness.
I thought this week too, that he keeps saying back to Jesus, like, you know that I love thee. And I almost want Jesus to respond and say, like, yeah, Peter, but you don't know that you love me. Like, right now you think you don't because of the mistake that you made. And I want you to know, despite that,
I love you.
I
trust you.
And you still love me,
yep.
even though you did that.
Yep.
You know?
Like, yep. And I have great expectations for you. It doesn't matter what happened. This is what I see for you going forward. And it's great things that are going to happen. And so he says to him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest I love thee. And Jesus says to him again, feed my sheep. And I love that thought that he's not going to put him in a comfortable situation. He's going to ask him to do something he has never done before, something he's not even qualified to do something he probably doesn't even feel like he has the tools of the trade for. And Jesus says, let me grow you again in this area. Let me make you more. I'm inviting you to become something more. And then in verse 19.
Into his next adventure. I almost want Jesus to wink right there. And like, hey, you ready for
what's about to come?
Part 2?
Yeah. And then at verse 19, and this is going to be the end of that conversation with Peter and Jesus just by themselves that they're having. That conversation is going to end the same way the conversation began 3 years ago on the Sea of Galilee with 2 words.
Same spot. They're in the same spot on the same beach.
And it's the same 2 words again. And at the very end of verse 19, follow me. And we just love the thought of that invitation of Jesus just inviting him into bigger and greater things. Am I doing this right now?
Yeah.
Those of you who know us well know this Peter story is one of our favorite stories. It is one that we are fascinated with. There are so many lessons that we didn't get into here, but we just love this pattern of the Lord teaching each of these lessons twice in a powerful way, and then this invitation at the end that is just like, it's not over.
Yeah. And just how he took Peter from, imagine what Peter thought he could be. Maybe he thought, I could be the best fisherman in all of Galilee. I could be the president of the Fisherman's Club. And now God saw something so different in him and invited him along the way. And we love the idea of asking ourselves, what if we took the same invitations the Lord gave to Peter? Like, what could he help us to discover? What if we followed it? What if what
if we answered those same 5 questions? What would happen to our life? And we just want to end with some of the thoughts that we've had as we've studied Peter before. Do you think anyone told Peter he was destined for remarkable things? That he was extraordinary? That there was a spark of greatness in him? The Lord did. He told him who he was. He showed him the possibility of who he could become. Without the Lord, Peter was just a simple fisherman. But with the Lord, his potential was immeasurable. And the same is true for you. There is a spark of greatness in you just waiting to be ignited. Your possibilities span the universe. You have within you the potential to become someone remarkable. You were not sent to this earth to play small, to shrink, to fail. You were destined to make a difference. You were made for amazing things. And we just want you to remember that and to think to yourself, accept his invitations. Because who knows who he can make you to become and what he has in store for you and for each of us. And really the adventure is just beginning. Yeah. That is so true.
And exciting to think about also.
Yeah.
We're going to end. Oh, let's say something about this because...
Okay, this is so fun. We get so many emails from you. We see you all the time. Everywhere we go, we love it so much. In fact, I sent a funny picture. We were at the New Kids on the Block concert with my kids that someone had given us tickets to. And even met some of you there who wanted to do pictures. And we just love that experience of meeting you and talking to you about this journey. And we were given a couple extra of these books. We thought it'd be so fun to maybe reach out and meet you. So we are planning just a fun visit at the American Fork Deseret Book on July 1st from 4:30 until 6 at night. We are going to be there. We've got between 50 and 75
we're kind of just
of these books that we're just going to give for free to the first
75 people who come. Or if you don't make it for that, we'd love for you to come just to say hi and meet.
And talk to you. So we'll be there, hopefully, if it all works out, July 1st, 4:30 to 6. We are going to put it on our Instagram, all of the details. So
or the newsletter. We'll put, newsletter or Instagram. Just watch one of those. Yeah. We just thought that could be fun.
Yeah,
it'll be fun to give away a bunch of these books about Peter.
And for those of you who aren't right here in Utah, where we are, we're putting our brains together to come up with something fun for you.
We've set some aside for...
So we'll, if you don't follow our Instagram, that really is going to be the easiest way to find us, either stories or on our feed, at Mr. Dave Butler. Is that right?
Yeah.
And at Emily Bell Freeman, Bell with an E. And be watching for details that week right before July 1st, because we are dying to see some of you. But now we want to end with how each of the Gospels end. There's just one message in each of the endings of the Gospel that we love, and we thought it'd be a fun way to end this study of the Gospel.
Okay, so we just did the end of John. We just showed you how, where we talked about, if we wrote all the stories of Jesus, the whole world couldn't hold them, and how that's almost an invitation to like write them down and be a part of them.
And that's John's invitation.
Yeah, John's
would be, just make sure you are writing down all of your experiences with Jesus. It's the count the fish invitation. That's what John's going to give.
Yeah. Mark's end's actually really cool. And you need a little bit of history for Mark. Mark was written to be read out loud in one sitting. That's why it's kind of the shortest. Takes about 2 hours. I have a friend who said he and his wife do this every Easter.
Oh, that's so
They
fun.
read the whole thing. Takes about 2 hours. And the King James translators did a good job of making it sound as pretty as the original Greek. But Mark, all the ancient manuscripts, the original manuscripts, not the originals, but the oldest ones that we have, Mark 16 doesn't go all the way to verse 20. It actually ends in verse 8.
You are gonna love this
And then
part so much.
the rest of it,
fun.
the rest of it gets added on in like the 15th and 16th century. So the original Greeks and very likely the original Mark ends on verse 8. So the way Mark tells the story is before you get to Mark 16, all the disciples have fled in fear. Peter has denied him. Judas has betrayed him. And now who do you have left? And you get now these women come onto the scene, right? They fill kind of the void and they come in. But after they meet the angels at the tomb, the angels tell them, go and tell the story of the resurrection. And verse 8 says, and they went out quickly and fled from the sepulchre, for they trembled and were amazed. But they didn't say anything to any man, for they were afraid. And the original Greek ends with the word and. So it doesn't end here in English, but it says, and they were afraid and like ... And that's how the original manuscript ended. And it leaves like the reader who's been watching the whole story, or the listeners who's watching the whole story.
Can you imagine if you were just sitting in the room and someone gets to the end of Mark and like, Peter's gone, the apostles are gone.
And the greatest event in all of history has happened. Jesus has been resurrected.
The women go, and then they're like,
because the readers are like, oh, good, the women came. And the women come, and it's like, and they didn't tell anybody because they were too afraid. And everyone's like, well, who's going to tell the story? Like, who's going to tell it? Peter's not, and Judas is dead, and the disciples are gone, and the ladies are afraid. And it leaves the reader or listener sitting there saying, like, well, someone's got to tell that story.
And then you become the witness.
Right. Is that so awesome?
That Mark invites you to become the witness. John wants you to count fish. Mark wants you to become the witness. Matthew, in Matthew 28, 19 and 20, he ends his saying, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. So the invitation from Matthew is to teach. And then Luke at the very end ends in verse 50, where he goes out and he lifts up his hands in verse 50 and says, and he blessed them. And ancient readers would have known, the Israelites who heard this, the Jews would have known, that whenever the priest would come out of the temple after the morning prayer was offered, the incense was burned, he would lift his hands up and he would bless them. Well, the story of Luke starts with Zacharias, John the Baptist's dad, going in, but remember he goes mute. So when he comes out, the whole congregation's there waiting for a blessing. So chapter 1 starts of Luke with everybody waiting for a blessing they never get. And then the end of Luke ends with Jesus lifting up his hands and giving them the blessing, what's called the priestly blessing, to the disciples who are there and to anybody reading. You can find that in Numbers chapter 6. This
is
going to
where
be one
you
of your
find
favorite blessings ever in Scripture anure. It's such a
who even knew it was
one.
here? This is why someone shouldn't have named the book Numbers, because then nobody read it. They should have given it a new name. Yes. But this is in number 6 right at the end, and this is the priestly blessing that the priest would give, and probably the one Jesus gave. Starting in 24, the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace, and put his name upon the children of Israel, and I, the Lord, will bless them.
Oh,
so that is the
so
final
good.
blessing that he gave to the disciples at the end of Luke.
And then it tells you, and they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. So maybe just think about those 4 invitations as we end up the Gospels this week to remember as you go through. Matthew wants you to teach about Jesus.
With Jesus. I love that.
Yeah,
He's like, and
with
I'm with
Jesus.
you always. Like Grace was saying.
yeah.
Like Matthew 28 is Grace's letter.
That's so true.
Right?
Luke wants you to remember that he has promised to bless you and again be with you and to go forth with great joy wherever you're going.
Anticipation.
Yeah.
And that's fun to
Mark wants you to be the witness, right? To continue the story, to continue sharing the story. And John wants you to write it down. Just count the fish. Those 4 things, and maybe that could be part of your week this week before we jump into Acts. It's just taking the time to reflect backwards and then think, how will Jesus be part of your story going forward?
Yeah.
Oh, we loved the
fun,
Gospels so much. They were so good.
But get excited. Next week we start the book of Acts, and buckle your seatbelts.
Oh, it's going to be
it's
so
still
good.
just as cool
Yep,
and good.
so good. See you next week.